for holding this hearing. As the chairman knows, and actually called for another hearing on an issue specifically related to my district in Los Angeles. We had a pipeline spill 2 years ago in Wilmington, a working class community near the Port of Los Angeles. Over 1,000 gallons was spilled into this residential neighborhood. I remember running over there that morning of the spill, and the smell was so nauseating. And then the residents had to deal with jackhammers tearing up the streets to locate the leak. Some people couldn't even get out of their houses because of the heavy equipment on a residential street to even go to work. At the time of the rupture, there was confusion over the classification of the pipeline. Phillips 66 had classified this pipeline as idle, a category that apparently does not exist. When they bought the pipeline, they were told by the previous operator that it was empty. The state of California and PHMSA were told it was empty. So in 15 years, it was never inspected. No one ever verified that the pipeline was empty. And my residents, of course, paid a price for that. I think that oil spill endangered the health and safety of many of my constituents, as well as property damage. So I'm reintroducing legislation today that will ensure that a company purchasing a pipeline does its due diligence and inspects the status of the pipelines they purchase. I think it's reasonable to say within 180 days of the sale, but I believe there needs to be a third-party verification by either PHMSA or a state authority. And I hope, Chairman Denham, you'll work with me as we reauthorize PHMSA to maybe include this in the legislation. The other thing that really upset me and my residents was, at the end of the day, Phillips was only fined $75,000 for this egregious act of misidentifying a pipeline, making up a category of idle, and causing enormous health and safety risk to my constituents. So, Administrator Dominguez, I have been asking for better oversight of our pipelines. Can you share with us today of how you believe PHMSA has improved pipeline oversight, particularly instances like this?
Thank you for the question. I think that there were a lot of lessons learned as a result of the incident that occurred in your district. First and foremost, our regulations require, as you stated, there's not an idle pipeline. It's either operating or it's not operating, and the requirements need to be met for both of those incidents. So, moving forward, there were a lot of lessons that were learned and applied, and how we can actually better work with operators, both.
But how have we closed that loophole? Without my legislation, how have we closed the loophole of a company purchasing a pipeline and just sort of having the previous owner say it's empty?
Well, there are requirements in place right now for how any operator actually uses their pipeline. So if it's not in quote-unquote current use, the bottom line is that there are requirements for how it's supposed to be operating. So if it's not filled with a particular gas or liquid, there are requirements, especially in a liquid situation, for how it should be treated. And so,
and what is the verification of a purchased pipeline by a new operator? Is there a third party? Is it you? Is it the state? Who says whether or not everybody's telling the truth?
I'm not aware that there's an actual verification process of that, but I'd be happy to look at it.
Good, thank you, because I think that's what our constituents are hoping from the federal government, that we sort of have this third-party verification. One of the other issues was, particularly in Wilmington, in very populated Los Angeles County, this is considered a high-consequence area because there are so many underground pipelines running underneath the streets of this residential community. And last year, I asked the acting PHMSA administrator about pipelines in these so-called high-consequence areas. Do you know if we've made any progress to increase the safety in these high-consequence areas, besides just alerting them to evacuation procedures?
For both, certainly in the hazardous liquid rule, we looked at how we actually address incidents of liquid in high consequence areas, but also as we move forward in the gas rule, we're also looking to identify opportunities that will look at
Thank
all
you.
kinds of consequences.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hahn. Mr. Micah, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr.